You are listening to Eat Meat Sparingly, a Word of Wisdom podcast. I am your host, Ali Essig. And today we have a special guest. I am so excited to welcome Cyrus Khambatta. Now, Cyrus is pretty impressive. I remember reading his book, Mastering Diabetes, when I first was thinking about going plant-based. And so it's amazing for him to be here now to teach you guys. But Cyrus, if you haven't heard about him, he has a PhD and he's a New York Times bestselling co-author of Mastering Diabetes. He runs multiple businesses, including Evolution Health, which is an evidence-based coaching practice, and Amla Green, a company that makes anti-inflammatory tea and coffee products with exceptional antioxidant power. Now, he has been living with type 1 diabetes for more than 20 years and has helped more than 100,000 people improve their health and fitness using plant-based nutrition, intermittent fasting, and daily movement. He's a dedicated father, husband, and athlete, and wakes up every morning with a thirst for making the world a less confusing place. Welcome, Cyrus. It's nice to have you on the podcast.
Awesome. Thank you, Ali. I'm so glad to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah. Now, first, before we go into your story, I want to talk a little bit about Amla Green because it can get confusing, especially for members of my audience. We don't drink green tea or coffee, but Amla powder, there are some amazing benefits to it that don't have tea or coffee, that have tons of antioxidants. Can you tell me a little bit more about Amla and why we should be using it?
For sure. So let's travel back in time. I became a plant-based eater in the year 2002, the year 2003. So that was like 22 years ago. And it changed everything about me. I started eating lots of fruits and lots of vegetables, and then eventually incorporated some legumes and some whole grains. And from the moment that I started, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that it was the right path for me because I felt electrified. Like I all of a sudden had so much energy, and my ability to control my blood glucose living with type 1 diabetes became so much simpler. So it was night and day difference for me. But it wasn't until the year 2016 when I came across this stuff called Indian gooseberry, which is kind of funny because my parents are from India and they have known about it for many years, and it's sort of part of the Indian culture. And when you go to India, you can't escape these Indian gooseberries. They're also called Amla berries. So I learned about it originally from Dr. Greger, and he had posted some videos about the power of Amla berries and why they're so powerful at reducing cholesterol in particular. So I was intrigued by that because obviously eating a plant-based diet can help lower cholesterol levels, but the Amla berry itself is like this superhero that nobody knows about that has the highest cholesterol reducing ability of any other food on the planet.
Wow.
And so naturally I was intrigued by that. And then I said, okay, let me learn a little bit more. So I went down the rabbit hole of the Indian gooseberry and I started to learn that yes, it's the most powerful cholesterol reducing food ever discovered, which is great. But then in addition to that, the reason why it's the most powerful cholesterol reducing food is because it's the most powerful antioxidant on the planet. There's no other fruit or vegetable. There's no other food, period, end of story, that has a higher what's called ORAC value. ORAC is basically just a way of measuring the antioxidant power of a food. So the Amla berry has the highest ORAC value of any food. And because it's such a powerful antioxidant, it has multiple effects. Number one, can lower cholesterol very quickly. It can lower cholesterol between 11 and 14% within a 3-week period, which is crazy.
Holy cow, that's amazing.
Yeah, we're talking about LDL cholesterol, which is the bad cholesterol, which is the one that's associated with an increased risk for a cardiac event in the future. Okay. Then in addition to that, it's also a very powerful blood glucose reducer, which obviously I'm interested in because I talk the game of diabetes all day long, and I've been living with type 1 now for almost 25 years, right? There's research that demonstrates that when you take people living with type 2 diabetes and you put them onto Amla berries and you split them versus people who are taking a pharmaceutical blood glucose lowering medication, the Amla berries are more effective than the blood glucose lowering medication, right? So number one, it lowers LDL cholesterol very powerfully and very quickly. Number two, it lowers blood glucose. Number three, it's a very powerful blood pressure reducing food as well. So when I learned about this, I was like, hold on a second. I got to find a way to take these Indian gooseberries and get them more popular and get them into the hands of people because clearly there's a lot of opportunity for improvement. The problem with the gooseberry is that it tastes like crap.
I was going to say it because I've ordered some on Amazon and I was like, because I've heard all about it from you, Dr. Greger. I'm like, I'll just order some on Amazon. Like, this tastes nasty. It's like bitter.
Yeah. I'm glad you've actually tried the gooseberry by itself because it's too much, right?
Yeah.
It's like that sour puckering face that you make when you eat like a pure lemon or a lime, right? It's like that times 10. So you put the Indian gooseberry in your mouth and it's like, it almost makes me want to vomit because it's just like, it's too sour and it's too much, right? So I knew as soon as I tasted the Indian gooseberry, I was like, this is why it's not popular. because it's disgusting. Like nobody's going to actually eat this thing. So I got to find a way to either mask the flavor or disguise it and make sure that there's a clinically relevant dose inside of every scoop. So it took me a while to try and figure out how to make this less disgusting. And so what I did was I went into Chinatown with my wife, Kylie, and with some friends of ours in San Francisco. And we went hunting to try and talk to anybody that could help us find different either tea or spices or some type of other botanicals that we can add to this stuff to actually mask the flavor. And then when we finally found a guy who was a green tea expert, so he's a tea expert, he gave us a couple of different options and said, here, go try these and see what you can come up with. So I ordered a bunch of spices online and I ordered a bunch of tea, and then I got some tea from this guy. And I went into my kitchen and I basically just started mixing it with any number of different combinations to try and come up with something tasty. And finally, the answer was in front of me the entire time, which is if you take oolong green tea and you mix it with the Indian gooseberry in a very specific proportion, all of a sudden, boom, the flavor of the gooseberry just disappears. And I was like, wow, that's fascinating, right? So the very first flavor was a tea-based botanical blend. Since that time, we went on to make many other powdered blends that have nothing to do with tea, that have zero tea, anything in them. So the next version we made was a hibiscus blend, which is hibiscus, mint, cinnamon, and ginger with the Indian gooseberry. And that one became a fan favorite pretty quickly. Then
that's my favorite.
Yeah, you like that one the most.
Right? I love that one. Yeah.
Awesome. Then we made an elderberry flavor, which is Indian gooseberry plus elderberry plus mint, ginger, cinnamon. And then we have some vitamin C, vitamin D, and zinc inside of it. And then we made a pumpkin spice flavor, which was, wow, that one was very tasty. And that one we included cloves because cloves also have a very high ORAC value as well. So we're adding to the antioxidant power. And then we ended up making a coffee product as well. So long story short, we have a whole number of products within this product line at this point. And the only one that I think there's two of them that are not applicable to your audience. Number one, the original green bottle, which is the oolong green tea blend, and then the coffee product. So regardless of that, don't buy those two. Instead, you can get the hibiscus flavor, you can get the elderberry flavor, and you can get the pumpkin spice flavor. And all three of those are winners in my book.
And you know what? I agree. And I have been adding the hibiscus and the elderberry version to my yerba mate for the last, 4 months. And the biggest benefits that I've seen, I feel like I already had decent energy. I'm already eating plant-based. But the biggest thing is that when everyone else in my family gets sick, I don't get sick. I don't get the common cold. I'm like, I used to. I felt like I was getting the cold all the time. That's the one thing I've changed. And I have not been getting as sick. I feel like the antioxidant power is amazing to strengthen your immune system and so powerful.
That's awesome to hear that. Actually, I've seen that from a lot of other people, myself included. And I'm glad to see that because what I've come to learn over the course of time is that antioxidants, like from a cellular biology perspective, what antioxidants really are is they are electron donor. And so what that means for those of us who fell asleep in chemistry class is that when there's an inflammatory process that's happening inside of your body, it could be in your liver, it could be in your muscle, it could be in your brain, you name it. Okay. Oftentimes the inflammatory process is initiated by these things called free radicals. So these free radicals are these molecules that are the byproduct of mitochondrial metabolism. And when these free radicals arise inside of the cellular environment, they are very problematic. And the reason is because they have lost an electron. Somewhere along the way of being synthesized, they lost an electron. So they basically become extremely erratic molecules that are trying to find a lost electron. And so when you consume antioxidants in your diet, the antioxidants are literally these molecules that just able to give away free electrons. And when they come to a tissue or they come to a cell that is in need of electrons because there's so much free radical damage, then they just start handing out electrons. And all of a sudden the free radicals are like, thank you. I've been looking for this. Now I don't need to go damage DNA. I don't need to go damage proteins. I don't need to go damage lipids in order to find these electrons. And as a result of that, the free radical problematic molecules basically just get quenched. So in my head, the way that I think about it is that when you're eating antioxidant-rich foods, you have a free radical fire extinguisher inside of your blood at all times. And it's going through and it's just putting out fires inside of your liver and inside of your kidney and inside of your heart and inside of your cardiovascular system. And as a result of that, you end up with a whole collection of benefits that you may or may not even know about. You may not even be able to feel them. So you can feel and you can sense that you're like, wow, I don't get sick as often because my immune system is now a little bit stronger. What I've sensed is that number one, my musculoskeletal inflammation has gone down significantly because I like to exercise a lot. And sometimes I can work myself into getting shoulder tension, back tension, and all of a sudden a very tight body. I put this stuff in and all of a sudden my muscles just relax big time, right? Other people have written back to us. They're like, oh my God, my mental fog, this brain fog that I've been dealing with for years, gone. Other people are like, oh my God, my skin is clearing up. Some people wrote back to us saying, oh my God, my cholesterol dropped by 35 points and I don't need a statin medication anymore, right? Mm-hmm. So you and I can't necessarily predict the effects of it. But what we do know is that there's literally not a single side effect of having a high concentrated dose of antioxidants every single day.
Wow. Not a single negative side effect, right? It's all positive. Yeah.
All positive. Everything's yeah.
And it's a whole plant food. It's just, you just made it so it's easy to add it in. And that's what I love about it. And so you suggest 2 servings a day, right? Is there a certain like morning and night, or how do you prefer to eat it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we have basically, when you open a bottle, there's a little microscopic scooper on the inside. It's almost like laughably small.
Yeah, it's so tiny. It's like a teaspoon. Not even a teaspoon. It's like
not even a teaspoon. It's like an eighth of a teaspoon. So what you do is you take 2 scoops per day, and you can do 2 scoops at a time, or you can space them out and do 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening. Doesn't really matter. Okay. And the beauty is that you can take the stuff and you can put it into anything. So you can put it in hot water and turn it into a tea-like beverage if you want. Cool.
Yeah, it's not sweetened. So it would be like an herbal tea because it's not sweetened.
Correct. There's no artificial sweeteners. There's no sugar. There's nothing. There's no fillers. There's no additives. 100% organic. So you could take it, you could add it to water and turn it into a drink. You could take it and you could add it to a smoothie, and then it just becomes part of the smoothie. You could put it into a soup. You could put it into a salad dressing. You could put it on top of your oatmeal. You could put it on top of your yogurt if you're eating that. Whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. Just put 2 scoops into your body in any way possible and watch what happens. What I tell people is I say, listen, here's my challenge to you. Take 2 scoops per day, every single day for 90 days without breaking it, and come back to me at the end of 90 days and tell me that it didn't work for you, that you didn't see a dramatic improvement in the way that you're feeling. And I given people this, I have yet to have a single person come back to me and say, this product didn't work. Right. Not a single person has come back to me saying that. So I know it works, and I would love to be able to help anybody who's looking for an added boost to reduce their cholesterol, their blood glucose, their blood pressure, or just feel like $1 million.
It really is the first thing I ask people when they're like, I've been following a plant-based diet, but I still have high cholesterol. I'm like, well, do you consume Amla? And that is my first question. That's the next thing that you can be doing to adding in to help with your cholesterol. So it's so great. And just so you know, we're going to put the link below, and you're going to save a lot of money with the link below, because if you just go to Amazon and buy it, you're going to buy a tiny little bottle. But if you buy it with the link below, you get a bigger bottle for around the same price. So it's definitely worth it checking it out.
100%. I love it.
Awesome. Well, I love Amla so much. I just feel like everyone should be using it. And you, again, have made it so it's not bitter. So I want everyone to hear that. But now I want to kind of rewind and go back so you can tell us more about your story. Have you always been plant-based? When were you diagnosed with type 1 diabetes? And how did it lead you to this path?
Great questions. Okay. So if we go backwards in time to the year 2002, all right, I was a senior in college. I was at Stanford University, and I was studying mechanical engineering, and I was just trying to graduate so that I could move on with my life. Right. So all of a sudden I started to feel really low energy, and I couldn't figure out why. So I was studying for finals. I was sitting there. I was just like trying to do this like thermodynamics problem set. And I was like constantly falling asleep. And then what I noticed is that I would get up and I would go to the bathroom and I would urinate every 30 minutes like clockwork. And I was like, that's weird. I think I've urinated 17 times today. That doesn't feel cool. And then my thirst was out of control. It didn't matter how much water I drank. It didn't matter how much Gatorade I was drinking. Whatever I drank, I got thirstier every 10 minutes. And I was like, this is strange. So I pick up the phone and I call my sister, who's a doctor of osteopathy. And I said, hey, Shanaz, here's what I'm experiencing. What do you think is going on? And she said, Cyrus, pause everything you're doing right now. Go straight to the health center. You are expressing the symptoms of type 1 diabetes. And I was like, diabetes? What are you talking about? I'm like, I'm an athlete. I move my body. I'm not overweight. I don't eat cake. And she was like, nah, you don't get it. It doesn't matter. Go to the doctor right now. So I went over to the doctor. I went to the health center, and then I checked myself in. They were like, hey, what are you here for? So I explained the symptomology. They brought me into a room. A nurse comes in. She basically takes a finger stick of blood glucose and goes into another room to go put it into a machine and get a result. She comes back, I don't know, 3 minutes later, something like that. And I was like passed out, and I wake up and she walks back in the room, and I'm like, okay, I'm in a doctor's office. How did I get here? Oh, okay. I walked here. Okay. What is she doing? Why is she looking at me? What does she have? What is the problem that we're trying to solve here? And then all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I am out of it right now. What is going on? And she looks at me, she goes, how did you get here? And I said, I walked. And she's like, okay, we need to take you to the emergency room right now. And I was like, okay, you're freaking me out. What is going on? She's like, your blood sugar, AKA your blood glucose, is 660 or something, 680. And I was like, this is Greek to me. What does that mean? She's like, it's supposed to be about 100. You're 6 times higher than you need to be. You likely have type 1 diabetes. We need to get you under medical supervision ASAP. So I was like, oh Lord. So long story short, I go to the hospital. They ended up giving me a drip. They basically hydrated me with IV saline into one arm. And then they actually gave me insulin into the other arm, and they monitored my blood glucose over the course of the next 24 hours. And they were able to bring my blood glucose down from 600 and change all the way down to 200, which was great. And then they discharged me within 24 hours. And they were like, here's a blood glucose meter. Here's some test strips. Here's some syringes. Here's a prescription for 2 different types of insulin. Here's a carbohydrate counting guide. Good luck. And I was like, what the heck is going on right now? This doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
I basically had to learn it a little bit of the hard way. And it turns out that about 6 months prior to that, I had actually gotten diagnosed with 2 different autoimmune conditions as well. One of them was called alopecia, which is why, as you can see, I have no hair. I used to have eyebrows and hair and a mustache and whatnot, and I lost all that hair. And then the third one was Hashimoto's hypothyroidism. So I ended up actually having 3 autoimmune conditions that set in within a 6-month period. And my whole life came to a screeching halt. So at this point, I was like, okay, I don't really know what to do. I was following the advice of my doctor. The only piece of advice they could give me was eat a low carbohydrate diet. That's it. Because if you eat a low carbohydrate diet, that will help you, number 1, keep your blood glucose low. And then number 2, it will help you keep your insulin use low. And I said, okay, great. You're telling a 22-year-old guy to eat more meat and chicken and fish and turkey and eggs and bacon, like not a hard sell. Sounds like a plan, right?
Right.
So that's exactly what I did. And I went back to my normal life and I started eating these quote unquote low carbohydrate foods. Yeah. So for people who are listening, the low carbohydrate world has reinvented itself many times over the last 50 years. First, it was the Atkins diet, then it was Zone, then it was South Beach, then it was paleo, then it was ketogenic, and now it's carnivore. And every couple of years, they kind of come up with some new marketing and some new terminology to try and convince people that, carbs are bad for you and that you should eat more meat. So this is a very prominent message that is louder than ever in today's world. And it pains me to see this because over the next 20 years, after having gotten diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and after having adopted this low carbohydrate diet, which actually made me feel very low energy, like even lower energy than before. And it made me much more inflamed inside of my muscle tissue, inside of my joints. And it brought my quality of life down so significantly that I switched over to eating a plant-based diet. And I effectively did the exact opposite, which is I significantly increased my carbohydrate intake and lessened my fat and protein intake and basically eliminated animal foods. And the net effect of all of that large macronutrient shift was that I gained a ridiculous amount of energy and my blood glucose became so controllable that it was almost like I was non-diabetic, right? So the promise that the doctors gave me was, okay, eat a low carbohydrate diet and it'll lower your blood glucose and it'll lower your insulin use. But it did neither of those. It actually raised my blood glucose and raised my insulin use. When I switched over to eating a plant-based diet, my blood glucose finally came down to a reasonable, normal, physiologically normal level. And my insulin use got cut by 40% within the first month. So it was painstakingly obvious to me that eating a plant-based diet that was constructed of whole carbohydrate energy, that is the difference, okay? I eat 0 cookies and crackers and chips and pastas and sodas and sugar-sweetened beverages, right? None of that, literally 0 of that. And I'm only eating fruits and vegetables and legumes and whole grains, period, end of story, hard stop, okay? So when I made that transition to eating this plant-based diet, all of a sudden everything unfolded. And then I spent literally the next 20 years of my life engrossed in reading the research. I went back to UC Berkeley to go get a PhD in the subject of nutritional biochemistry because I was like, this is fascinating. I want to understand more about it. And in the process of doing that, I came to learn that this ketogenic philosophy or the low carbohydrate philosophy acts like a short-term Band-Aid. Okay. It's very effective for most people in the short term. And most people talk about the fact that when they eat a ketogenic diet, they experience, number 1, rapid weight loss. And there's a physiological reason for that. And it has to do with resetting the appetite center inside of your hypothalamus. And it definitely works in controlling your appetite and getting you to eat less food. So if you eat a ketogenic diet, you can then lower your appetite, which can then reduce your calorie intake, which can then lead to weight loss. And then as a result of weight loss, many other biomarkers start to fall into place. Your A1C value, which is your average blood glucose, comes down significantly. Your fasting blood glucose comes down. Your fasting insulin level comes down. Those are all good things. Your C-reactive protein, which is a marker of inflammation, comes down because you're losing body fat. Your blood pressure can come down. Your total cholesterol can come down. Your triglycerides can come down. But the one marker that seems consistently to go in the wrong direction is your LDL cholesterol.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that just, we see it over and over and over again. You see two things, actually. LDL cholesterol goes on the rise, and then what's called ApoB, which is an even better marker of cholesterol metabolism, that also goes up significantly. Okay. So people in the ketogenic world like to portray the message that eating a ketogenic diet is your one-stop shop that will save your health. But in reality, what I have seen both from the research as well as from helping thousands of people is that a ketogenic diet can certainly help start the process of cleaning up your diet. It can certainly get you off the ultra-processed food bandwagon and get you to a point where you're starting to eat more real food, more whole food that does not come as a result of a manufacturing process. And all of that is fantastic. So I give full credit to people who are eating a ketogenic lifestyle, who are trying to improve the quality of their diet. 100% high five. I'll give you a hug any day of the week. Okay. But what I want this community to also understand is that over the course of time, what the research demonstrates is that people who eat more animal-based foods, whether it's red meat, white meat, chicken, fish, dairy products, eggs, and beyond, those people end up suffering in the long term from an increased risk for many chronic diseases, including type 2 diabetes, including many forms of cancer, including cardiovascular disease. That could either be hypertension, it could either be high cholesterol, or it could be increased risk for coronary artery disease. And then finally, the worst of them all, in my opinion, is chronic kidney disease, okay, which can lead to the need for dialysis and your stage 4 end-stage renal failure, okay? So my whole point here is that the world has sort of like been brainwashed, I will say, into believing that either a plant-based diet is dangerous or that a plant-based diet has all these anti-nutrients that come from these, these things called lectins, and that the only way to actually successfully navigate lifestyle change in the long term is to eat a low carbohydrate diet or a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, and then that's going to lead you to the promised land. But I have seen, in fact, the exact opposite.
Yeah. And a lot of it is, you say that short term, like between 3 and 6 months, yes, ketogenic, it's going to show that it's going to benefit in all the ways. But I love that you pointed out in your book that you look at those longer term studies and you see a different picture. Where if you're reading another book that's promoting more of a ketogenic style of diet and they're sourcing or talking about certain studies, how can you, as the consumer, really know the truth? Is there something like, oh, that study was only 6 months or that study was only 6 weeks? How can you find the truth when other people are saying, this is the way, it needs to be keto, you need to protein first? How do you find the truth?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's not an easy question to answer. And it's something that even like a lot of scientists are still trying to find the answer to. So what I have come to learn over the course of time is that if you go to this place called PubMed, right? So PubMed is basically a search engine online that acts like Google, but its job is to basically provide you with scientific research for pretty much anything you want that's medically oriented, right? So you can go to PubMed and you could say type 2 diabetes and mayonnaise. And you can hit enter. And you will find studies that demonstrate that people who eat mayonnaise are at a higher risk for type 2 diabetes. You will also find studies that say people who eat mayonnaise are at a lower risk for type 2 diabetes. You're like, wait a minute, how is that possible, right? Then you have to go read the actual studies and try and figure out, was there a mayonnaise company that happened to be funding one of the studies that said, oh, hey, mayonnaise is great? There's a lot of things you have to take into account. How many people were in the study? What was the duration of the study? Was it funded by a mayonnaise company? So on and so forth, right? There's many different things that you have to take into account. So the way that I go about it now is what I look for is not, you can't just look at one study, or you can't look at 2 studies, or you can't look at 3 studies. If you're trying to get an answer to a particular question, like as an example, is saturated fat healthy? Okay.
That's a good one.
Question. You would think we would know the answer to that question, right?
Yeah.
So if you're trying to answer that question, what you have to do is look at what's called the quote unquote, the weight of the evidence. And what that means is that you have to assemble a whole collection of different types of studies, and you have to analyze all of them simultaneously and then come up with a conclusion. Okay. So your average person doesn't want to do this because it takes a lot of time and it's kind of a pain in the butt and it's annoying. But what I've learned to do is to basically say, okay, I'm going to go to PubMed and I'm going to put in this search term about saturated fat and diabetes risk, saturated fat and heart disease risk, saturated fat and chronic kidney disease, saturated fat and Alzheimer's risk, so on and so forth, right? And you have to come up with these, you have to read the studies. What you're looking for, what I start out with is called the highest quality of evidence, which are referred to as meta-analyses.
Analysis, yeah.
Okay, so meta-analyses are basically papers that aggregate other papers together. And they say, okay, cool. Let's take a look at all these different papers together and pool all the data into one group, and then try and figure out what the heck what the answer is. So you start with meta-analyses, you read those. Then you go to the next one, which is systematic reviews. And systematic reviews basically say, okay, cool. We're going to analyze a whole bunch of different papers. We're not going to pool the data together, but we're just going to explain what other people have already found. Then you go to what are called RCTs, randomized control trials, and you look for those, and you're trying to find out, okay, these are individual studies that have been conducted by a research group, and you want to find RCTs that are short in duration, that are maybe like 6 weeks to 12 weeks long. Then you want to find RCTs that are longer in duration, that are maybe 6 months to 12 months long. Then you want to find RCTs that are maybe 2 years to 5 years, and so on and so forth. Then eventually, once you have all of that assembled together, you can basically say, okay, cool. I have the individual studies, I have the systematic reviews, and then I have the meta-analyses as an aggregate group of studies. And then what you do is you have to basically use your powers of intuition to try and figure out, what does this story tell you? And it's not an easy thing to do. Now, the last thing I'll say about this is that there's this thing called deep research. So you can go to Grok, you can go to ChatGPT, you go to any one of these large language models, and you can use what's called the deep research model. And you can basically say, hey, I want to understand whether or not saturated fat is beneficial or problematic for human health. Please help me understand the answer to this question. And in order to do it, please take into account the risk for heart disease, the risk for chronic kidney disease, the risk for fatty liver disease, the risk for autoimmune conditions, the risk for Alzheimer's disease, and the risk for diabetes. Please only use systematic reviews and meta-analyses and randomized control trials, and disregard all other types of information. Please only use human studies, and only use studies that have been published within the last 15 years. Go. And when you're that specific with your search query, and then you use the deep research model, what ends up happening is that it takes like 5, 10, 15 minutes, and it goes and it digs up lots of research. It'll go read 80 papers for you within the next 5 minutes. And then it'll present you with a really detailed study that basically says, okay, here's how I analyzed all this information. Here's what I've come up with. Here's the conclusion. Would you like me to investigate anything else? And if you start there, you can get a really good understanding of what, the scientific research has said. And it's kind of a little bit of a cheat sheet so that you don't have to spend 3 months digging up this information, and you can get it relatively quickly.
I love it. I love it. I love that you can actually find the truth if you really want to seek after it. And so I have a couple questions. Number one, how did you even hear about a plant-based diet? And what do you have to do specifically to make sure that the plant-based diet works for type 1 diabetes? Because some people, it can make their blood glucose go all over the place. So how did you even hear about it in the first place? And then what did you find that is unique about plant-based and diabetes?
Great question. So I found it in the first place because I was living in San Francisco, and I happened to be friends with an individual a guy who said, have you ever heard of this guy named Doug Graham before? Maybe you should talk to him. And I was like, Doug Graham? No, I don't know who he is. And I did some research, and turns out he's basically a guy who's a chiropractor who teaches people how to adopt a raw food diet to significantly improve their health. And this is the year 2003, before I didn't know anything about plant-based diet. So I was like, okay, cool. Picked up the phone and I called Doug and I talked with him and I said, hey, I have type 1 diabetes. Do you think you can help me? And he laughed and he was like, oh my God, you're in for it. I cannot wait to work with you. Get your butt over here. And I went to a health retreat that he was putting on in Colorado. And I hung out with him for 7 days with a bunch of other people. And that's when he basically did me a cold turkey flip. And we went from eating an animal-based diet to a plant-based diet overnight. And I saw these ridiculous changes in my blood glucose and my energy levels. And I knew that was the beginning of this remarkable transformation that took another 20 years to unfold. So I credit my buddy who was in San Francisco. I credit Doug for literally saving my life and starting the journey of me going to get a PhD and beyond and trying to help other people as well.
That's so cool. I love when I met your wife. I love that she said when you guys were dating that you said that it's your mission to teach the world the truth about diabetes. And I love it. I love it. We need to know the truth, So what is the truth when it comes to diabetes specifically? How do you need to adjust a plant-based diet so that it can stabilize your blood glucose levels?
Great question. Okay. The truth that I've come up with over the last 25 years that I've also applied to probably more than 10,000 people at this point is pretty straightforward. Okay. Most people, again, what we talked about earlier, earlier, most people think that carbs are the problem. So people point a finger at carbs and they say, don't eat anything that's carbohydrate rich, right? It could be a banana. It could be a rice cracker. It could be a piece of bread. It could be a bowl of black beans, right? Anything that has carbs is bad for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a lot of the plant-based world who's like, oh no, all meat is bad for you. Don't have meat, don't have eggs, don't have fish. All of that stuff is napalm for you. Okay. It turns out that the truth is pretty much somewhere in between the two of those. Okay. The two extremes are usually never correct. And the truth usually hides somewhere in between the two of them. Okay. So what I've come to learn over the course of lots of time and lots of research and lots of personal experimentation is that human metabolism doesn't work well when there is a high intake of when there's a high intake of fat and simultaneously a high intake of carbohydrate in your diet. Okay. So if you are eating a diet that contains a significant amount of fat, which is anything over approximately 20% of your total calorie intake, and then simultaneously a high carbohydrate intake, tissues have a very difficult time operating when both of those fuels are present in your blood at the same moment in time. Okay. So as an example, if you're eating a meal like the standard American diet, you're eating a meal that contains a hamburger. Hamburger is a perfect example because we got fat and protein that comes from the patty itself, but then you also have carbohydrate that's coming from the bun, and then you have carbohydrate that's coming from maybe the French fries that are part of the meal as well. So you have a high fat plus a high carbohydrate meal, okay? Or you have pizza, okay? You got the carbohydrate that's coming from the crust, but then you have the fat that's coming from the cheese and maybe, I don't know, some sausage that's on top, okay? So those types of meals and that type of diet in general is very problematic because as soon as you consume both a high fat and a high carbohydrate meal or diet at the same time, the fat, all of the enzymes and all of the machinery that's required in order to fully metabolize and process and transport and uptake and store and utilize all of the fatty acids in your food is a machinery that's directly opposed to the carbohydrate utilization and storage and transport and uptake machinery. Okay, so you have two different factories. You have factory number one that does everything related to fatty acid metabolism, and you have factory number two that does everything related to carbohydrate metabolism. And these two factories hate each other. They don't talk to each other. They don't like each other. And in fact, there's biological mechanisms that make it so that when factory number one is operating, it actually down regulates factory number two from operating properly. Okay, so it's like the US and China. It's like when the US does one thing, then China reacts, and China does something, then the US reacts. And it's like the two of them will probably never be friends. Okay, and you and I can't change that because we are living in a body that's just specifically designed to operate that way. Okay.
The question is, say you eat a banana and everyone says, oh, if you eat a banana, it spikes your blood sugar, then eat it with peanut butter. So anyway, so tell me why that can help in the short term versus obviously like the long term, but
yeah. Okay, cool. Let me answer that banana peanut butter question in just 1 second here.
Yeah.
So if we know that there's two factories that are basically operating with completely different machinery that are opposed to one another, then it makes sense that if you move to one side of the equation, you basically say, okay, cool. I'm going to consciously decide that I'm going to make carbohydrate the bulk of my diet. So I'm going to upregulate my carbohydrate intake and I'm going to downregulate my fat intake. Okay. That's what we have found to be a very effective way at controlling blood glucose. And when you do that and you shift over to that one side of the equation, then you end up with very efficient carbohydrate metabolism. Okay. Carbohydrates can be utilized. They can be broken down very effectively in your small intestine. They can be transported to the target tissue, which is either your liver or your muscle tissue or your brain. They can be uptaken very effectively. Insulin is very effective at getting the glucose inside of those tissues. And then those tissues can either store it for later use as glycogen, or they can utilize it right away and burn it for ATP. Your brain basically is burning for ATP 100% of the time. And carbohydrate metabolism, it functions very efficiently if and only if your total fat intake is low. Okay. So in other words, carbohydrate metabolism is very effective in a low fat environment. Okay. Full stop. Now, if you go to the other side of the equation, you were like, no, I don't want to do that. I like my barbecue. I want to eat hot dogs. I want to eat red meat and chicken and fish. Fine. So you move over in that direction. Now, what you end up doing is increasing your intake of animal-based foods, increasing your intake of fatty acids, and simultaneously decreasing your intake of carbohydrate. When you do that, well, guess what? All of a sudden, your ability to control your blood glucose is very good, right? You'll get a similar collection of results like we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
everything related to the ketogenic diet is going to unfold in your favor. You're going to probably end up losing some weight. You're going to feel a little bit better, and your glucose will come down, and your blood pressure and your cholesterol and so on and so forth. And so you're going to be like, okay, great. How is it that operating in the middle doesn't work, but I can go to either side and I'm going to get benefits? Right? It's kind of crazy. Yeah. But what we have found, again, is that when you operate in the ketogenic world, it's a ticking time bomb, and you're going to get benefits in the short term, but in the long term, it's actually going to increase your risk for many chronic conditions. But if you move over to the other side in the carbohydrate world and you eat a plant-based diet, not only can you improve your health in the short term, but you can simultaneously improve your health in the long term. And so what I tell people to do is I say, listen, I want you to put on your short-term and your long-term goggles simultaneously. Okay. I want you to care about what your blood glucose does at this next meal. I need you to care about that. I want you to care about what your blood pressure is tomorrow morning because it is important. Okay. But simultaneously, every single choice that you make today, I want you to also think 30 years into the future. Okay. I want you to think when you're 75 years old, are you going to regret the decision that you're making at this very moment in time? Or are you going to thank yourself? Is your future self going to thank you for making this decision right here at this meal? Okay. So if you're constantly wearing your short-term goggles and then putting your long-term goggles on and switching back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, what you'll end up finding, and if you do a lot of the research, you'll end up finding that eating a plant-based diet is the only way to both satisfy the short-term and the long-term simultaneously. I have not found a single other dietary pattern that enables you to solve problems in the short term and simultaneously solve problems in the future. A plant-based diet is the only diet that I've ever seen that does that. So it can make your carbohydrate metabolism very effective now. It can lower your insulin use. It can lower your A1C. It can lower your fasting blood glucose. It can lower your post-meal blood glucose, and you feel like $1,000,000. Simultaneously, your blood pressure can come down. You can lose weight. You can lower your cholesterol. You can lower your LDL. You can lower your C-reactive protein, and you're like, great, I love this. This is awesome. And 30 years into the future, a lot of those things will still be true. But if we go to the other side and we go to the ketogenic world, I have zero confidence that 30 years into the future, this current generation of ketogenic eaters are going to thank themselves for eating that way, because the research demonstrates that in the short term, you get benefits, but in the long term, the lack of long-term research about ketogenic diets is definitely a giant red flag.
Right. And so going back to the banana, why is it that if I'm just like eating the standard American diet, and when I eat a banana, my blood sugar spikes, but if I eat a banana with peanut butter, it stabilizes a little bit more, knowing those two factories?
Yeah, exactly right. No, those two factors. Okay. So if we get a little bit more granular, what ends up happening is if you eat the banana and your blood glucose goes up significantly, okay, the reason that your blood glucose went up is not because the banana is the problem. The reason your blood glucose went up is because you're trying to eat carbohydrate energy in a high-fat environment, okay? So it means your diet is already high-fat to begin with, and now you are trying to add carbohydrate energy on top of a high-fat diet, and your liver and your muscle tissue don't like it. Okay. Your liver and your muscle tissue are already operating using the fatty acid machinery. And now you are asking them to simultaneously use the carbohydrate machinery, and they don't know how to do it. Okay. That's the reason. So if you take that banana and you say instead, okay, let me put a bunch of peanut butter on top of it and then eat it simultaneously, what ends up happening is that both a high fat and a high carbohydrate food enter your mouth at the same time. They get inside of your stomach. They get inside of your small intestine. In your small intestine, the fatty acid energy or the lipid energy actually gets absorbed quicker than the carbohydrate energy. There's mechanisms to make sure that when those two types of nutrients hit the lining of your small intestine, that the microvilli structures end up absorbing the fatty acids, putting them into your lymph, and then dropping them into your blood, and they get there quicker. So they actually win the race to get inside of your blood. Once they're inside of your blood, one of the things that they can also do inside of your small intestine is they can send a feedback mechanism back to your stomach to basically slow down carbohydrate absorption, to slow down the uptake of all carbohydrate related things, and to slow down the passage of food from your small intestine, from your stomach to your small intestine. So in other words, the presence of the fat actually causes a little bit of a carbohydrate traffic jam. Okay. So that means that the fatty acid machinery, the fatty acid machinery basically is prioritized, and it enables the fat to get inside of the liver cells and inside of your muscle cells and inside of your blood quickly. And then the carbohydrate metabolism slows down significantly. And that's a good thing for you, because if you slow down carbohydrate metabolism, well, then guess what? You're not going to see the blood glucose spike. Okay. So the blood glucose spike becomes blunted because rather than trying to do something, AKA metabolize all those carbohydrates within a 30-minute window. Now it's going to take 2 hours to actually fully metabolize and uptake and transport all of those carbohydrate molecules. And as a result of that, rather than your blood glucose going to 200, now all of a sudden your blood glucose goes to 115 and it comes down because time is the X factor. And the fat actually allows the carbohydrate to get digested slower. And that's a good thing for you, which would help blunt that spike. Okay. Right. So you might look at that and be like, okay, cool, sweet. I saw these pictures online. Like the glucose goddess is a perfect example of, she has picture after picture after picture where she says, don't eat a pear, have a pear with a yogurt. Don't eat a banana, have a banana with peanut butter. Don't have a smoothie by itself, have a smoothie, but then add almond butter to the smoothie. And it's the same pattern over and over and over again. Carbohydrates are bad, add a fat to a carbohydrate, and then that'll blunt the spike. And it works every single time. But again, these are all short-term solutions. What you don't realize is that in the long term, the presence of the fatty acids inside of your liver and inside of your muscle are causing a problem called as insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is a very big problem that literally is present inside of the two tissues, inside of your liver, inside of your muscle. And when insulin resistance sets in and insulin resistance grows and insulin resistance persists over the course of time, good luck. That's when things start to spin out of control. That's when your risk for many chronic diseases increases. That's when your risk for prediabetes and type 2 increases. So even though in the short term, you might be getting improvements, in the long term, you have this unfortunate chronic condition that is lurking behind the scenes that will come back with a vengeance a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road. And then you're going to end up in a position where you're like, darn, how did I create this problem in the first place? Yeah. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. And also I want to clarify, what is low fat? Like you say there's a specific number that you have found that works to make sure that you're mostly using the carbohydrate system instead of the fatty acid. So what is that number?
Correct. What we found empirically, just from working with a lot of people, is that there's some magic somewhere around the number about 30. I'd say somewhere between 30 and 40 grams per day. Okay. So
and that's total fat, not just saturated fat, right?
Correct. That's total fat. So use a food logger, use Chronometer, use FitnessPal or something, and put all your food into there. And then take a look at it on a 24-hour basis and say, how many grams of carbohydrate did I eat? How many grams of fat? How many grams of protein? And if the total number of grams of fat is greater than somewhere between 30 and 40, call it 30, 35 grams, then you're moving into medium fat territory. And then if you go higher than that, you're moving into high fat territory. My recommendation is to try and keep your fat intake to approximately 30 grams per day, somewhere in that ballpark. And if you can commit to doing that for 30 days in a row, and simultaneously, you also make sure that the carbohydrate energy you are putting into your mouth comes from whole foods, again, fruits, vegetables, legumes, and whole grains, then what you are likely to find is that your blood glucose improves significantly, and you will be able to control your blood glucose much better than you might be able to control it right now. And you might get these light bulbs that pop off in your head, because that's what happens to a lot of people.
Do you need to be perfectly vegan or perfectly plant-based to see this?
No, you do not. You absolutely do not. I like to kind of push people in that direction, but people are welcome to stop wherever they feel comfortable. Because a lot of people are like, I don't want to give up eggs. I don't want to give up chicken. And I'm like, great, then don't give it up. It's fine. It's your choice. You can do whatever you want. But oftentimes they find that when they have, 1 egg or 2 eggs per day, all of a sudden they're like, this 30-gram fat quota. Oh, I just filled it pretty quickly. A lot of people are like, oh, I really like avocados. I'm going to eat an avocado a day. I'm like, go for it. Have a good time. Try and hit that 30-gram fat quota and see what happens. Right. So if you really want to make this game work, staying at 30 or below is likely to do the trick. But if you have those animal-based products in there, you're going to basically fill that 30-gram bucket pretty quickly. And, it's possible. It just takes a little bit more effort.
And what about children? Is it different for, say, a 12-year-old or 8-year-old who is diagnosed with type 1 diabetes?
Yeah. In terms of what number of grams of fat per day? Yeah. So with children, it's a little bit different because their calorie needs are lower, and therefore their total carbohydrate, fat, and protein intake is lower. So I don't have the number in front of me right now for children, but it also differs based off of whether you're talking about a 6-year-old child or a 14-year-old child. But long story short, the numbers are going to come down. So if it's 30 grams per day for an adult maximum fat intake, for a child, let's call it like an adolescent who's a teenager, likely it's going to be somewhere closer to about 20 grams per day. And then if you're looking at a young child who's maybe between the ages of 0 and 10, we're probably looking at somewhere about 15 grams a day or something like that. But I'd have to sit there with a calculator to try and figure out those exact numbers. I just happen to know.
Is it 15% of their total calorie intake, 15% or less? Should be fat.
You usually do 10 to 15% of total calorie intake in fat.
Okay. Now I'm going to get a lot of questions from, I have a friend whose husband has type 1 diabetes, and he's like, that's great, but I just want big muscles. So as someone, and I love that you're here and you're on this show because you do work out, you are ripped, you are toned. And how do you get enough protein? You're keeping your fat down, especially because tofu has fat in it. So how do you, like, what are you eating? How are you getting enough protein? How are you making this work to also feed your muscles?
Okay, great question. Now, I used to be, when I first learned this methodology, I was also in the camp of protein doesn't really matter that much.
Yeah.
So people would ask me about protein and I'll say, okay, from everything that I know, eating something like 40, 50, 60 grams of protein per day is enough. It's going to meet your baseline needs. Over the course of time, I've done a lot more studying specifically about protein, and I've come to learn that there's a different way of looking at protein. So Christopher Gardner from Stanford University, he's pretty outspoken about the fact that they did these research studies back at UC Berkeley, actually where I got my PhD, in the exact building I got it, where they tried to answer a simple question, which is, what's the baseline amount of protein? What's the minimum amount of protein required in order to meet your sort of basic metabolic needs on a daily basis? And what they found was that the answer was 0.8 grams per kilogram ideal body weight. That was the answer. Okay. So what you do is you take your body weight in kilograms and you multiply that by 0.8, and whatever that number is, that meets your baseline minimum, right? But if you're an athlete, if you want to be muscular, I'm in that same boat. Right. I'm 160 pounds and I want to be strong as a horse. Right. If you are an endurance athlete or you're a strength-based athlete and you really want to perform, okay, that number of 0.8 grams per kilogram is insufficient. It's not going to work. So I've actually had to evolve my thinking over the course of time and learn that your activity level is the second piece of information that you have to throw into this equation. Okay. So you start at 0.8 grams per kilogram. That's your baseline if you were literally lying on your back, not doing anything.
And what's that per pound? That's 0.36 per pound, right?
Let's do the math on that. I think it's going to be 0.36 per pound. I got to, let's see here. So let me just do the math here. 165 by 2.2 times 0.8 is 58. Okay. So then 58 divided by 160. The answer is 0.36. Exactly right. Okay. So 0.8 grams per kilogram is their baseline need. But then if you're an athlete, okay, now there's this graded scale of I'm a new athlete, or like I strength train a little bit. Let's put it that way. I strength train a little bit and I do a little bit of physical activity. Call it one day of activity per week. Okay, fine. Then I do a medium amount of activity. I'm active maybe 2 to 3 days per week and I do a little bit more strength training. Okay, fine. That's athlete number 2. And then you have athlete number 3 who's, oh no, I exercise 5, 6, 7 times per week, and I do a significant amount of weight training. I lift relatively heavy weights, and I'm trying to grow my muscle tissue. Okay. That's athlete number 3. Okay. Each one of these athletes is going to have a slightly different protein requirement. The athlete at the very beginning is going to have a baseline requirement of about 1.2 grams per kilogram. The athlete in the middle is going to have a baseline requirement of about 1.6 grams per kilogram. And then the athlete who's really strength training is going to have a requirement of about 1.8 grams per kilogram, maybe even as high as 2 grams per kilogram. Okay. So if you're talking about your friend here who has type 1 diabetes, I think you said, is like, cool, sweet, I want to be muscular and I want to like really work out hard. My answer is, okay, great. First thing you have to do is go work out hard. You need to stimulate what's called muscle hypertrophy. Okay. You have to push hard. You have to put your muscle tissue under tension and you got to make it a very strong effort. Number 1.
And progressive overload over time as well. Yeah.
Exactly right. Progressive overload over the course of many months and eventually get bigger, stronger, faster, right? So that's number 1, create that stimulus. And then if you're already operating in that mindset and you're already putting in the work, that means that right off the bat, I would go straight to 1.8 grams per kilogram protein intake. Okay. So let's just do the math for me. I'm 163 pounds. I divide that by 2.2, which brings me to 74 kilograms. So if I take that number and I multiply by 1.8, that means that I have to eat 133 grams of protein per day. Okay. Let's round it off. 130 grams of protein per day. Awesome. It turns out that's what my trainer actually told me to do. He said, your goal is to eat 135 grams of protein per day. Okay. So it is a job. It is a full-time job for me to make sure I get 135 grams of protein into my diet per day. It's not easy, but it's definitely doable. And it's doable by eating a decent amount of legumes, beans, peas, and lentils. And then having some tofu in there, maybe having some tempeh in there. And then also I straight up use protein powder. I get protein powder from a company called Complement. They're very good friends of mine, cleanest protein powder on the market. Okay. And I put that into my diet. I get sometimes 2 scoops in the morning, 2 scoops in the afternoon. And the combination of that plus legumes, plus a little bit of tofu gets me to 130.
Yeah. That makes sense. And is 1.8, wouldn't that be, well, I'll have to do the math later, but it's obviously not 1 pound per pound of body weight, because that's what the average kind of what you hear all the time is, oh, if you want to be an athlete, then because if you weigh 160 and you're getting 135, that's not 1 pound per pound of body weight.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
So the difference is because when you convert pounds to kilograms, it's not divided by 2. It's divided by 2.2, and then you're multiplying by 1.8. So the numbers just get slightly weird enough that if you basically translate it to pounds, the simplest explanation here is it's going to be about 0.8 grams per pound. That's like the upper limit for what I find to be necessary. And it's very doable on a plant-based diet. Some trainers will tell you that you should get to 1 gram per pound, right?
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of a debate about whether you're consuming excess protein, then you end up just peeing it out and it goes through your kidney and it ends up causing excess kidney usage. I'm not an expert on that particular subject, but I can tell you that if you aim for approximately, call it 1.8 grams per kilogram or 0.8 grams per pound, which is the same, you will be getting a very decent supply of amino acids every single day. And if you can't build muscle using that, then we might have another problem, which is that you're not consuming enough energy. You literally are not eating enough calories. That could probably be the second thing that we'd have to look at. But long story short, somewhere in that ballpark, in that range, can definitely get you to be able to build muscle and maintain that muscle mass over the course of time.
Oh, so helpful. I wish everyone in the world could hear this whole podcast episode because there's just so much confusion. There's so much confusion on how much protein you need. And I love that you clarified, look, if you're not working out at all, like the RDA is sufficient for you, but which is 0.36 grams per pound of body weight. But if you are in the gym, working really hard, progressive overload, hypertrophy, strength training, then for you, yes, 0.8 grams per pound. That's so good.
100%. Actually, what I was thinking about doing for the longest time now is I'm going to put together a calculator that it's like an Excel spreadsheet that's pretty sophisticated that basically says, this is how much I weigh and this is how active I am. And then it basically just spits it out for you. And it does all the calculation on the back end. It says, this is how many grams of protein you should be eating. And here's how you can get there. So as soon as I build that, I'll send it over to you and you can use it and distribute it as much as you want.
I love it. I love it. Okay. So then my final kind of in conclusion with all of this is knowing that my audience, people who are watching this, most of them are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And in our health code called the Word of Wisdom, we have this line that basically tells us to eat meat sparingly and that to eat more plants of this earth. And while a lot of people avoid that, what do you think that would have done for you in your life? Had you grown up where this was just part of your culture, part of you understanding, how would that have helped you through this whole process, knowing that, okay, maybe I shouldn't just go straight to the animal products. Maybe I should focus on what my faith tradition is telling me to focus on.
That's a great question. I think what it would have done for me is that I remember when I was a soccer player, when I was younger, right? I played soccer basically from the age of like 5 through 38. And I played like pretty competitively at all times, because I freaking love that sport. All throughout my high school career, I felt like I had a ceiling on top of me. The only way to describe it was that no matter how hard I tried, no matter how hard I pushed, no matter how fast I ran, no matter how much I trained, no matter how much time I spent in the gym, I could not get past a certain point. I could not get any faster. I could not become a better soccer player. I just couldn't progress. And it used to bother me because I was like, man, how are all these other players getting stronger and better and faster over the course of time? And I am capped. That doesn't feel fair, right? Then I switched over to eating a plant-based diet, and all of a sudden that ceiling just blew off. And all of a sudden I was running more, I was running faster, I was recovering quicker, I was spending more time in the gym, I was getting better gains. And I was like, oh my God, the answer was inside of me the entire time, because I never thought for a second that the food on my plate mattered. I mean, I knew it mattered kind of vaguely, but I didn't really understand that the food that I was eating, which I thought was quote unquote healthy, was actually creating the ceiling in the first place. So to answer your question, had I known then what I know now, I would have started eating a plant-based diet at the age of like 4, 5, 6, you name it. And I would have used that to my advantage. And I would have trained harder and been able to be more competitive from a younger age. And then I would have tried to push all my friends to doing the same thing. Because I have a feeling that if I were eating a plant-based diet from a very young age, that I would have been just a little bit more superhuman than I actually was. And as a result of that, I might have been a better soccer player, a better athlete, and I would have been able to push past that ceiling. And maybe that ceiling wouldn't have even been there in the first place.
Wow. That's amazing. That's like the best testimony I can ever hear. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was a very noticeable difference. And I was like, you go through life and you learn things all along the way, and you're sort of like, I don't regret anything. I don't regret a single decision. I just kind of feel like it would have been cool to have that information a long time ago, but say life, that's just where we are right now,
Yeah, no kidding. Well, Cyrus, you have done so much good in this world, and I am so grateful to have you on this podcast. I'd love to have you back in the future at some point, just because I think your mission of teaching the world the truth about diabetes is so important because we live in this world of nutrition confusion and there's truth. And it's also in the word of wisdom. And Cyrus is an example of if you follow this, you can see a ton of benefits. So thank you so much. I appreciate you. And I'd love to have you back in the future.
You rock. Thank you, Ali. I appreciate everything you're doing. And I know you're spreading such an incredible message. So keep up the good work. And thank you again for having me.
Thanks. Guys, I hope you loved that interview as much as I did. That was amazing. There were so many questions that I've had on my mind that he was able to answer. And Cyrus, as you know, is the co-author of the New York Times best-selling book, Mastering Diabetes. And Mastering Diabetes has its own coaching platform. But Cyrus has actually stepped away from that coaching platform. So if you want to work with Cyrus directly, you should check out the link that I've included below. That is for his new coaching platform called Evolution Health. His old business partner is sticking with Mastering Diabetes, as you might have noticed, and now he's doing his own program with his beautiful wife. And together they are coaching people through transitioning to a plant-based diet. If you struggle with diabetes, pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, all of the things, PCOS, if you need that extra help and support, make sure to click on the link below to learn more about his new coaching program, Evolution Health. All right, thanks so much, guys, and I will see you next week. Thank you for listening to Eat Meat Sparingly, a Word of Wisdom podcast. I'm your host, Ali Essig. And if you need more help and support with transitioning to eating more plants so you can lose weight and feel better, improve your gut health, and just reduce your risk of chronic disease, then make sure to check out my PlantWise membership. That's PLANTWHYS, because I like to teach the why behind eating more plants. But if all you need is just a couple more delicious recipes that feed your family and everyone loves, and not to mention super simple and easy, then make sure to check out my YouTube channel, which is also PlantWise, PlantWhys. Hope to see you there.